Hey,
Hi.
I'd love to start from the beginning of Little America. When did it first start as an Epic magazine project, and what was the first spark that it could make a TV show?
Well, Lee and I are old pals, very, very old pals, and he called, and we do stories that go off and work and, get adapted for film and TV, and sometimes a producer or writer like Lee will call and say, I've got this idea, maybe it can be enlivened by true stories. So that's what happened, and he called and said, I want to do an anthology show about immigrants. Can we find real people and see what that inspires for a show? So we sent a bunch of writers and journalists around the country scouring the nation for different stories and brought those back. And we were seeing them the whole time and getting a sense of what the show was. And it was just very clear once we had the stories, like, oh, everything we need is in here. This is a great diverse set of stories that can make exactly the show that we imagined.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the strengths from an anthology series versus a series that follows maybe one main character?
I think that it was really exciting for us to tell parts of people's lives, and rather than kind of follow someone's entire journey, we're kind of pulling snapshots here and there, and that the kind of the mosaic of all of those stories is the show. That the breadth of our country, the breadth of diversity, and the breadth of the storytelling is what makes the show special to me. And I think that if we can surprise the audience with this one is in the United States for 3 minutes, and this one there's no sound, there's plenty of sound, there's no dialogue, and the one that Sean wrote and directed, I think that's what's exciting about an anthology series is you feel the tone, hopefully from episode to episode, feels similar, it feels of a piece, but within that you're playing around with form and playing around with structure, and you're also introducing such a variety of characters.
Yeah.
And it gives a huge amount of freedom to the writer and director to almost create their own little film.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be tied. The shooting style could be different. The energy, the time it spans could be different. And I think I had an experience watching the show, because I think when we made it, we're all in it and you're working on it every day and you're like, is it good? I don't know, we're doing it. And just like the show coming out and sitting back and watching it, and really imagining myself just as an audience member and not someone who knows all the trials and tribulations along the way. Like, the tapestry of faces and the breadth of following these different stories that all take place in these different parts of the country and over, someone's a different age or gender. It was quite powerful to see that as a tapestry of, like, this is what our country looks like. Like, let's not forget that this actually is what America is all of these different people and their little human experiences that are happening in cities or towns. And we just chose to, like, shine a spotlight on that person for this one moment, and that feels cool to see them all together.
I also think that it kind of made me, weirdly, when I watched the show, it kind of makes me fall in love with America again in a nostalgic way. Like, the music, Zach Cowie is our music supervisor, is incredible, real nerd about world music, but also just the songs that he put in that kind of capture a time and a place in the States, and seeing some of these wide shots of horses here, or then you see snow here. Like, the country is gigantic, and there's so many different places for us to touch. And I thought that was just really exciting, and also just being introduced to all this amazing world music and falling in love with, like, a Persian singer from the 70s, and falling in love with the Jadu sisters, one of whom just passed away from Nigeria. I mean, all these things just kind of, it was just exciting. It was an exciting thing, both creating it and then sitting back and watching it and seeing it all kind of come together, because there's so many different pieces to make a show like this.
Yeah. I think tapestry is the exact right word. I'm glad you brought up the silence. I thought that was such an engaging, interesting episode. I love that episode. Where did the initial idea to make it without dialogue come from, and what were some of the fun challenges on set shooting it?
Well, I think it's challenging. Not only was it in silence, but it was a silent retreat where people are just sitting there in a room. So I think the challenge...
It's like, where's the action?
It's like, what happens? Like, and even when I talked to Yamana, who was the subject, who was based on, she was like, we just sat all day long every day. And so to try to go, like, well, what was your brain doing while you sat there? And so some of those things that she just mentioned in our conversations, like, oh my God, monkey mind, and you struggle with monkey mind. I'm like, monkeys? Maybe I'll get a real monkey to come and be in the episode. So I think
the whole episode was just designed because Sean wanted to meet a monkey.
Sure, the whole season, really.
Yeah, right.
Pretty much. There were several monkeys. Lee narrowed it down to just one, but that was the highlight of my life, was working with that monkey. But I think, yeah, it was a challenge to sort of find, like, what was the humor? How do you connect with someone when they can't ever voice. You can't ever really know them. So how can we use this episode and like through the other characters in these very small interactions or moments get to know this person? And I think weirdly that episode became almost like a metaphor for what it's like to come to the U.S., you know, to be a stranger in a strange land, to be an outsider where everything feels kind of off and weird, and you're looking for key clues in human behavior as to how you're supposed to be. And I think that episode was kind of the quirky, weird one, but then it almost became like a metaphor for like the immigrant experience in general. And the irony that like no one knows she's an immigrant until the end when she speaks, and so in a way the silence is an equalizer. Like
the silence is the universal language,
right?
Yeah.
And then you realize how difficult it is for her to be an immigrant in the U.S.
And so she gets to make this love connection purely on a human and physical basis, which like if only we could all get back to that point and not have communication and words and differences get in the way of finding connection.
I mean, making that episode was a little bit like going to a silent retreat where it seems like a really good idea. And then you're like, oh man, this is really hard. Because we did sort of back, and my girlfriend actually told me that story. That's her friend's mother, and I told it to Lee. And so the whole thing was always built up like, it's so funny, it's so weird. You know, it's silent, and then at the very end, they've had this whole romance, and then realize like, oh, they don't speak the same language. So we're always drawn to this kind of like how it all went to this point. But then as Sean and Lee were talking about, then we had to figure out what does that actually mean? How do you make that into something? And then through painful work, like at a silent retreat, a meaning arose. And so it's also a metaphor for itself.
I reread Siddhartha when I was writing. Let's just put it that way.
Hey, it's a great book.
It is
Anytime.
a really good book. Yeah.
But I think with that episode, there was actually more dialogue, and we kept stripping it away.
wow.
Like
Yeah,
we were
right.
terrified. It's like you can't do an episode. I mean, the first draft of that script had the least dialogue of anything that anyone I knew had ever been a part of. So it wasn't
Lee
like
was terrified.
what?
Lee was terrified.
I was terrified.
But
No,
Zach Quinto used to talk.
yeah, Zachary Quinto, who's the biggest star probably that we have in season 1, had lots of lines of dialogue and was kind of guiding the audience and guiding the people at the silent retreat through their meditation. And then we took away all but 4 lines of dialogue from him. And I don't know that he would have signed on to do it in the first place, but he likes it now,
I had
right?
to call Zach and be like, well, first of all, to Lee and Alan Yang's credit, they were the ones who were really pushing. I was like, I don't know if an audience is going to go with this if we take out all language. And they were like, let's just do it. Let's just be bold. And it was exciting to have that freedom as a filmmaker to be like, let's just do it. But yes, I totally had to call Zach and be like, so we cut all of your lines.
Remember when you came to New Jersey for 10 days?
Remember when you came to New Jersey and like there was that monkey and
The monkey's in, your lines are out.
the monkey's in.
The monkey has the big monologue at the end. Zach?
Yes.
Oscar did have his own trailer,
Right.
the
Sure.
monkey, and, but
He's
no,
playing Spock in the next movie. It's weird. It's a whole weird thing.
Zach was very cool about it.
The
He
good
said
news
so.
is, though, Zach, that it showcases your physical abilities, your
Yeah,
your
very
gestural
expressive face.
abilities.
He was very
Exactly.
expressive face.
Yeah, it felt very freeing as an audience member to watch too, especially that sort of tone shift at the very end. Are there any kind of tones you're interested in exploring in season 2?
I think that we kind of like, you don't want the show to feel like a gimmick. You don't want to do every single episode has kind of like, oh,
Right.
this is the twist. But I think that they're like, we're talking about doing an episode that's set in 1832.
Cool.
And I think that there's so many different versions of immigrant stories, and it's up to us and the researchers and the writers to kind of say like, okay, well, what would that look like, and how? And then the poor production people that are like, what do you mean 1832?
Like, you know, horse and carrot.
Right.
New York tenements.
Right. We
in
just need to,
1832.
we
You
just
know,
need
more
to-
monkeys.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, exactly.
You can recreate New York Harbor here, right? Anywhere.
So yeah, I mean, the show is logistically ambitious, and we
Yeah.
just want every episode to stand on its own, and that when you watch Little America, you're excited because you feel like, okay, there's a certain level of storytelling, and that you connect with the characters a certain way, but from within that, you don't know what we're gonna do. Like, oh, you think the character is this thing, and a lot of what we've actually been talking about in season 2 is you start a character in a place where you're like, oh, I understand, this is a story about X, and then within a scene, you're somewhere else.
Yeah. I guess finally, there's kind of a fraught discourse going on about America right now. What do you think
What?
this... I hate to be the one to bear the bad news. What do you think this show's thesis statement about America is?
I mean, I think we all roughly agree that the show is representing what we sort of, the highest ideals of America, right? That it's an inclusive place, that it's a plurality, that it's a place that anybody can find refuge and, sort of be themselves. That was part of the, animating idea of the show at the beginning. And I think that at times when we were doing this, I sort of felt like, oh, are we being naive? Is this not really America anymore? Are we sort of telling a false story? But I don't think that's the case. I think that the ideals are very sturdy and will sort of outlast whatever political moments we have. And then the show speaks to that. It explains sort of like why it sort of like creates the notion of America that is totally lasting.
I also think that there's this narrative, without art like this, it's like there are rapists crossing the border and people are invading your country, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And I think that I understand why that exists. But every one of those people, every one of those immigrants, they all have a story. And I think that when, whether or not you're an immigrant or the child of an immigrant, when you see yourself in a character, you see yourself in someone that's not like you, I think there's something really powerful about that. And I think that that's something worthy of being seen and being talked about. And I don't think, we never set out to make the show political, but I think the fact that we're talking about it and the fact that you're asking that question is exciting, and that needs to be part of the conversation. And that when you look at someone on the street who doesn't look like you, know that they want the same stuff that you want.
I also think there's something about taking a word that has become very loaded, like immigrant or immigration, or and I worked on Orange is the New Black for many years, and like we were sort of doing the same thing with prisoners, and the idea of like people have an idea of like who people are that are in jail. But like if you just focus on one person and you stop trying to tell a story about everyone and you just tell one story, and it's having two immigrant parents that had very different stories and came from different places. My dad was a refugee who was escaping for his life, and my mom came to go to art school because she wanted freedom to be an artist. And like they're all different reasons that people come here, and this country is still a place where people can invent themselves and be themselves. And I think just reminding everyone of like, take away the power from that word, take away whatever is on that word, and let's just understand that all that means is someone who came here from somewhere else, and they're a human being just like you. Yeah. And I think that was a long thesis statement, but that's what it is.